Hi, Chris. How are you? All right?
I'm well. I'm very well,
Good.
extremely well. Thank you for coming onto the podcast. I'd watched some and listened to some interviews that you've done about your life and what you've been through, and I was
Yeah.
really interested, especially the mountaineering part because I've done mountaineering before, albeit just in the UK. So that part
Hmm.
of it really interests me. So I'm really glad I got you on the podcast. Before we continue, for those who don't know who you are, can you just briefly explain who you are and basically your journey up until this point?
Yes, I can. Yeah, Jules Mountain. That is my real name, and I was diagnosed with cancer in 2007,
Mhm.
and it was a tumor up behind my left ear. Unfortunately, in my head, and I thought, well, you can cut off your arms and your legs if you get cancer there, but you can't really cut your head off. It's a little bit terminal, and there's not much good really. And I had a 7.5 hour operation. I suffered from anaphylactic shock afterwards. And I'd say the scariest moment actually, and I don't know whether this will interest people, but I was in the recovery well, I was in a room and my brother was there, and I felt like I was going. This was after the surgery. This was This was actually the next day, and I said, I think I'm going. I think this is it. This is it. And he
Yeah.
sort of said, nurse, nurse, and he starts screaming for the nurse. Next thing, the crash team come in, and the guy said to me, I may have to massage your heart. So I'm sort of thinking, he'll be massaging it, on my chest. He goes, no, 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 we're going to open up your sternum. We're going to open you up. And he says, I'm going to put my hand inside and I'm going to massage your heart. Well, at
Yeah.
that point, I already thought it was going on. We're like, I'm dying. At that point, the heart just went 10 to the dozen. I thought, this is it. It's all over.
Yeah.
Anyway, they put me on oxygen. They put an ECG on me, started monitoring me, and then they rolled me over and put a fantastic cocktail of drugs into my backside, and that was it. I was sort of high as a kite, and they didn't have to cut me open, thank goodness. But I've got a huge scar all the way down here where they did the operation and removed my chin out the way so they could get to the tumor and remove the tumor. Hey, I'm pleased to say that was successful, and I had 4 months chemotherapy afterwards. Lost all my hair, the usual,
Yeah.
and made a full recovery. And I'm very, very grateful to the people at UCLH, where I was treated in London, for their magnificent work, and the UCLH Hematology Cancer Care Charity, that I'm now an ambassador for the charity. After that, I decided um, I wanted to make sure that I was still as capable after the chemotherapy and the operation as I was before. When you have chemo, it makes your fingers and toes, the extremities, very tingly, and it can affect the circulation. So I wanted to try and convince myself that I was still as capable. So I set myself a small challenge of trying to climb Everest.
Mhm. Yeah. That's
Yes.
that's an extreme from one extreme to what made you think what
I
made you
know,
think
just a little one, just a little one there, a little
yeah,
one.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I can tell you about that. It wasn't. I've always fancied doing that. I've always fancied doing that. And um, I was in Chamonix doing some ski guiding, and I love the mountains, love skiing, love ski touring and climbing. And I was in a bar, as you are after skiing, called the Office in Chamonix. Some people, I'm sure, some of your listeners will know that. And there was a guy called Dave who ran the bar, an English guy who ran the bar. And obviously, Chamonix is next to Mont Blanc in France, in the Alps. And I'm there chatting to Dave, and he said, we're chatting about climbing, and he said there was a guy coming in later on. He takes expeditions to Everest. I said, oh, fantastic! You've got to introduce me to him. And the guy came in and he introduced me to him, and I said, and as I was saying the words, I knew as they were coming out, it was not a good thing. And I said, is there any chance I can come along?
Hmm.
And I just, as I said it, I thought, oh, crikey, what have I done? Because I thought, if he says yes, I'm going to have to go. I'm going to have to do it. And he turned around, he looked at me, he goes, yeah, he says, you do a bit of ski guiding, done some climbing. He goes, yeah, yeah, all right, you can come. And I had 5 weeks to get ready. 5 weeks. People spend years preparing to climb Everest. I had 5 weeks to get all the gear and get ready to go. But
Yeah.
that to me is if you think about these things for too long, you won't do them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You won't do them, and that is quite common. So you've got to just somebody says to you, "How about this?" You've got to say, "Yeah, let's do it." And when you've had a and people that have had cancer or people that have had near death experiences will relate to this. When you've had that experience and somebody says to you, "Oh, how about this?" And the old me would have gone, yeah, possibly, yeah, I'm busy, I've got this on, got that on. yeah, and you and ah, and then you don't do it. Now, if people say to me, "How about this?" I'm like, "Yeah, great, let's go. Let's go and do it tomorrow." Yeah, let's go. Fantastic. I'm very much let's just take the world by its horns and whatever is good out there, let's go and do it. And I think that is as a result of having cancer and without the treatment I would have died. And with the treatment I'm still here. So it's I'm very, very grateful to UCLH in London.
Yeah, I mean, I've never had cancer, touch wood, but I can relate in terms of something like that really changing your mindset on life. And that was one of the things that fascinated me about my story. And you talk about how you're very much a go-getter. Like if you see something you want to do it, you'll just do it.
Mm.
How would you describe yourself before you were diagnosed with cancer, in terms of your personality?
I think I was I think I'm a category A personality. So I was always a go-getter, always quite driven. And I think, but I thought I was very similar to everybody else around me. And they say, no, you're not. You're not. You're on another level. You're off. You're off like a rocket. And I don't perceive myself like that. I don't really see that. I see that I'm just the same as I've got a really nice bunch of friends. We all go skiing together, and they say your energy levels are amazing. Because I'm always like, let's go and do this, let's go and do that, let's go here. And I just think I'm like everybody else. But it's the way, it's interesting, isn't it, the way you perceive yourself,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and they say you're like a cat with 9 lives and you've used them all up already.
Gosh.
So
Must last because one of the things I've read about you is even before you had a cancer, haven't you had a lot of injuries because of sport you played? Like you had injured your spine and your liver, correct me if I'm wrong.
yes, I had I injured my spine playing rugby, and I had a I damaged my L3, L4, L5, S1, S2, the lower part of your back. I
Mm,
crushed the discs playing rugby, and I had a spinal decompression operation. The interesting thing is, I had an operation for the cancer in 2007, and you'd think I'd have had enough of the operating theatre. And in 2009, I was back there having a spinal decompression operation. I had chronic sciatica down my left leg, and it was so bad at that point. I think the cancer had taken it out of me a bit, um, and the treatment is not great, and that had obviously taken its toll on me. And by 2009, I had chronic sciatica shooting down my left leg to the point where I'd be doubled over. I'd be walking down the road, and I would be going, oh, oh, and I'd have to sort of bend over to try and get my spine to open up to release the pain down my left leg. And I went to see a doctor about it, and he said to me, he said, yeah, he said it's the scale's 0 to 10. And I said, well, where am I on the scale then? And he said, well, you're around about an 8. He said, so we can operate or we can not operate. We can, you can have some physiotherapy. I said, I've tried that. I've tried the physio, tried the chiropractic, tried a lot. And he said, I will operate. And he said, I normally spend 15 minutes on each joint, where the
yeah,
vertebrae are and the disc is in between. And where
mm,
the disc is where the nerves come out. So when your disc gets crushed or wears away, that's when the bone starts pressing on the nerves, and that's why you get the sciatica, the chronic shooting pains down your leg. He said on one of your nerves, he said I spent 45 minutes clearing it. So it was really, really bad, and it's been great. The operation was a big success. I was quite surprised though that I wanted to go back into the operating theatre only 2 years after my cancer treatment.
You say surprised, but isn't it one of those things where you just got to do what you got to do, especially after going what you went through? Is like, okay, you might not like it, but you just have to almost, for want of a better phrase, grin and bear it and just go through it.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it was painful, and I thought while I'm about it, I've survived the cancer, and while I'm about it, I might as well crack on and get this sorted out at the same time. And it needed, I'd been suffering from a bad back for 20 years. Hadn't stopped me from doing anything, but it was like I was a very, very keen runner as well. And the surgeon told me stop running, and I only stopped running about 3 years ago. So I was very naughty, I didn't take notes. I now mountain bike, and that is far better for the spine than that. The running is bad, it's bang, 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 bang,
Yeah.
bang, bang, bang on your heels all the time. Absolutely love it. I could run. You know, Forrest Gump, run, Forrest,
Mm.
run. You know, I could do that all day long. Love running, but I don't do it anymore now.
Yeah, yeah, it's like I said, I can understand in terms of wanting to be active because I'm active myself, and I'm
Mm.
one of those people. My friends will say to me, "Chris, you're doing too much at any one time." It's like, okay, I'll try and rest, and then I'll just get agitated from resting, so I have to do something
Yeah.
all the time.
Well, you're probably a category A personality like me, you know, where you need to be active all the time. You need to be doing something, you know, you're just, and it's not something that you, I think it's something you're born with. You're just born that
Yeah.
way, you know, where I get bored very easily. I think if I hadn't gone into business and climbing and skiing, I'd probably been a drug addict. You know, that's the reality of it because, or a criminal. I don't know. You know, you've got to have an outlet for this stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Business was my outlet because in 2007 I was selling a business at the same time as having cancer.
Okay.
Uh, and that was my you know, my excitement was running the business. That was great, you know, and that kept me very, very busy. And if it wasn't that, I would have needed something else to fill that void.
What qualities from running a business in that sense helped you get through the cancer? Obviously, say you're a go-getter, but are there any other qualities from being in business and being an entrepreneur that helped you go through?
I think just the belief that I was going to get better.
Mm,
I didn't know initially because he said it's one of two forms of cancer. It's either a very, very aggressive form of cancer, and they were basically saying I'd be dead within a couple of weeks, or they said it's another form and we can treat it. And luckily, it was the latter.
okay.
So they could treat. But if I hadn't had any treatment, I would be dead now. I would have died probably within 12 months
Gosh,
without treatment.
gosh, it's terrible. But yeah,
Yeah,
so,
but you know you can't dwell on that. Yeah, you asked me about injuries. You know, I had the spinal issue. I've broken 15 bones now skiing. Um, Ribs many times, arm twice, leg, thumb, wrist, lots of injuries, and luckily nothing. I dislocated my shoulder as well. And then you mentioned the liver. I got hepatitis A from a sandwich in Leadenhall Market in London. And that really knocked me for six. That was I was dating this lovely girl at the time, and ended up in hospital. And she was great. She came to visit me every day. And the first day she came to visit me, I was in this side room. You know, not in a ward. I was in a side room, and I thought, oh, this is nice. They've given me a room. How lovely, you know. And she turned up, and she got a face mask on, and she got a gown on, and she got some gloves on. You know, I said, what are you wearing all that for? And she
yeah.
goes, well, you're in an isolation room. I'm like, I'm what? I'm what? And and I said, well, where does it say that? And she's on the door. So I went to the door. I hadn't gone out. I've been there for 12 hours, you know. I opened the door and it said isolation report staff will go. I'm like, nurse, and they're like, get back in the room, get back in the room. You know, I'm like, what's going on here? And they said, you're in isolation because you've got liver failure and we don't know what's wrong with you. And I was, you know, my eyes were yellow. They were quite yellowish. And that was Monday. And then Tuesday got worse. Wednesday got worse. And they said on Thursday, so we're going to biopsy your liver. So they stick the big needle in, you know, and suck a piece of your liver out, and then they can go and test it.
Mm,
I used to date a doctor, so I rang her up and I said, they're going to biopsy my liver. And she says, oh, crikey, you don't want that. She goes, in 20% of cases, your liver will hemorrhage and you'll die. And I'm like, sorry. I said, did you say 20%? I said, one in five. She goes, yeah, one in five. She goes, you really want to avoid that if you can. And that was an awakening to me. By that stage, I looked like the Incredible Hulk without the muscles. I was green. My skin was all green. All my arms were green. And my eyes were bright yellow at that point because I was just full of poison. The liver wasn't working. And that was Wednesday night. And then we're going to biopsy the liver on Thursday. And just incredibly, overnight, I started to get better. And when the consultant came to see me on the Thursday morning, he says, you're looking a bit better. And by Thursday lunchtime, I was looking a lot better. And basically, the liver had fought the virus, which is not uncommon with hepatitis A, and it has started to regenerate. And by Thursday night, I was looking very good. By Friday, I was looking back to normal again. I mean, it was absolutely. The liver is apparently the most regenerative organ in the body. which is quite incredible. Anyway, I didn't then drink for. I was told not to drink for 6 months. I didn't drink for 6 months. Then I still had a very high bilirubin count. Didn't drink for another 6 months. Didn't drink for another 6 months. And after 18 months, they sent me to a specialist, and he said, "You've got Gilbert syndrome." I said, "Well, what's Gilbert syndrome?" He goes, "You've got an abnormally high level of bilirubin in your blood, and that's the poison. So if you drink, you get a lot of poison in the system, and your liver will process it while you're asleep overnight and get rid of it." And I've always had an abnormally high level of poison in my system, which I'd never been tested for, so I didn't know. So I didn't drink anything for 18 months, not a drop, and I've never really drunk that much since.
Yeah.
So it's quite. I mean, the interesting thing is I actually changed my lifestyle. My girlfriend at the time, I started going out to restaurants rather than just going to the bar, to meet up with friends. I'd go to the restaurant, or I would go to the cinema. I'd do things that didn't involve, standing at a bar and drinking lots of alcohol.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was
So
quite a life-changing. That was quite a life-changing thing for me, and I think very positive life-changing, because it meant that I wasn't drinking as much, because up to that point Friday and Saturday is great. Let's go out and let's party, and I stopped doing that from that point onwards.
yeah, I mean, again, I know I keep repeating this word, but it's certainly not something I can relate to. Without going into detail, I changed my lifestyle after that. I've been teetotal since I was a teenager, so
Mm,
I've been never inspired. But in terms of food, and I used to have some junk food, but not a lot. I was mainly going gym and so on. But certainly over the last year, about 15 months, I'd say, it's definitely changed my lifestyle now. Like, I don't eat any red meat anymore, which
mm.
anyone who know, and chicken especially, anyone who knows me would know those two things I would eat in abundance.
What
So,
chicken?
yeah, chicken and red meat as well. Like,
Yeah.
just one sitting of red meat, I'd have a lot. But yeah, so in terms of something like that affecting you and changing your lifestyle, I can definitely
Mm.
understand. Just quickly, something I heard, I don't know if you can confirm this, but is it true that you didn't tell your two daughters that you'd had cancer until years after you were well?
I didn't know. I didn't. I didn't tell them at all. Actually, they didn't know anything about it until they were going to publish the book. And the publisher said the book was about Everest, trying to climb Everest, and it was the 2015 with the absolute disaster. I was buried alive at base camp, and a terrible year to go. Over 100 injured people, and somewhere between 19 and 21 people died at base camp, and I was there. And I didn't tell my daughters about my cancer treatment because they were very young at the time. And then I wrote the book about going to Everest and the experience and being buried alive. And the publisher said, "Well, what about your cancer?" I said, "Well, I don't really talk about that, and my daughters don't know about it." And he goes, "Well, look, that is fundamental to the book, because because of your cancer, you set yourself a challenge and you went to Everest to try and climb it, because that's a fundamental part of the story." And I said, "I'm not sure about it. I had to think about it, because I thought if I put this in the book, I've got to tell my daughters before it's published about it." And I made the decision to tell them, so I did.
Okay, how did they take it?
They were fine. I said I'm absolutely fine, girls. There's nothing wrong with me now. But I said a few years ago I was diagnosed with cancer, and I said they treated it and cut it out. So they were, "Oh, you're right now, Daddy." I said, "Yeah, I'm all right now." "Oh, that's okay then. You
Okay,
know. So I tried to tell them in a way that was very positive and wouldn't worry them.
okay. Cool. So you decide to you're going to try Everest.
Hmm.
You got 5 weeks to prepare.
Yeah,
Bear in
yeah.
mind what you've been through. What do your family say about it?
They said you're bonkers. My
Yeah.
dad said you really. My dad said you really. He said, "Do you really have to go and do it?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm sorry, Dad." I said, "I do. I really." I said, "I feel very excited by this." I said, "I haven't felt this excited in years." I said, nothing's really got me going um, like this for a long time." And I said, "I really want to go and do it." And he's like, "Oh." And he said, "Well," he said, "I know I won't change your mind." He said, "When your mind's made up, you'll go and do it anyway." I said, "Yeah, I'd like to go with your blessing," so I did.
Gosh. Yeah. And how much experience had you had of climbing mountains or done anything of that ilk before you went?
I had climbed the three big peaks in the UK,
Yeah.
Ben Nevis and Helvellyn. I'd climbed Mont Blanc. I'd done some training on Mont Blanc actually. In the 5 week period I had, I'd gone to Chamonix and done a little bit of training, and I remember shouting at the sky, come and get me, come on, throw everything at me you can, and let's see if I can survive it up on Mont Blanc. And I climbed up to top of Mont Blanc and skied off it, and that's fabulous. That is, but you've got to bear in mind Mont Blanc's 4,800 meters high. Originally the highest mountain in Europe, but now of course Elbrus is the highest mountain in Europe. But Elbrus is actually in Russia, but it still counts as part of of Europe. And at 4,800 meters, Mont Blanc, the peak of Mont Blanc, is 600 meters lower than Everest Base Camp. So to get that in perspective, so a lot of people climb Mont Blanc will be the peak of their climbing career.
Mm-hmm.
Base camp on Everest is 600 meters higher than the summit of Mont Blanc, and you've got to live up there for 2 months. That puts it in perspective. Most people would never dream of staying on top of Mont Blanc for a night, and I'm going to be 600 meters higher than that, and I'm going to live there for 2 months. And it's horrible. It's horrible. I don't like small spaces. I like big open spaces. And I was in a two-man tent with two massive kit bags. So I had the tent to myself, but it's like a Halfords tent. You go into Halfords and you buy a tent for the back garden, two-man tent. It was just like that. That was my home for 8 weeks, minus 15 degrees C every night. And it's just a bit of canvas. That's it. There's no insulation. These aren't special tents. They're good quality tents, but there's nothing special about them.
Yeah.
And I bought a thermarest, so an inflatable mat that I could put my sleeping bag on, and I'm gonna live there for 8 weeks. It is absolutely awful. It's hell on earth. It's 25% of the people that go to base camp never climb Everest
Mm, that doesn't surprise me.
because they go. I mean, there's anywhere between 200 and 300 people. There's about 30 expeditions go every year. We're all in the same area. We're all in the middle of the glacier that's coming down, middle of the valley. And so we keep away from the avalanches that are coming down regularly on either side. We're generally too far away from them for them to affect us. And there will be about 30 expeditions there, and there are around about 200 to 300 people. But bear in mind, 25% will never even try it. So you can get rid of 50 to 75 people straight away out of that group that will not even try. They'll arrive, and within a week they'll be gone.
Gosh.
And
Yeah.
I was worried. I mean, it's like saying to somebody, right, you see your deep freeze there, go and climb into that for the night, and let's see if you're still alive in the morning. I mean,
Yeah.
that is what it is like. It is. I remember the first night going to sleep at base camp. I'm thinking, I'm going to die. I was fully dressed. I had my beanie hat on, and I zipped the sleeping bag up, and it zips so it's just around here like that. So just a bit of your face is poking out. I'm like, I could see all the steam coming out as I'm breathing. I've got my headlamp torch on, and I've got to get my hand out, turn my headlamp torch off, put it on a hook at the side here, so the night if I need it, I can get to it, and then zip back up again with my hands inside the bag. And the problem is, you wake up in the night and you're having a nightmare or something. You're like, oh, and you're stuck in this bag. You're like, I can't get out, can't get out, and you're trying to find, and you forget where you are. So you're trying to get the zip. You're trying to, and it's like you're sort of bound up in this bag, and you're trying to get the zip, and you're trying to get the zip undone. So like, get my head out, and breathe, and try and get out the bag. And it is, I had a few nights like that where I sort of wake up and think, where the hell am I? And try and desperately get out the bag very, very quickly. And it's not easy to get out of that bag. But it's like anything. I thought when I got there, I thought, right, I'm going to spend one night here and then I'll go home. And it was just, I was always the last person. They had a mess tent, where we'd have tea, and they had tea and coffee, where we'd have, a breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then they had lots of hot water there always, so you can make yourself tea and biscuits. And I thought, well, I'll just do one night. I'll go home tomorrow. So I did one night, and then I thought, all right, I'll just do 2 nights then. I'll do 2 nights. then I'm going to go home. And after 2 nights, I thought, well, I'll just do a couple more nights, and then I'll go home. And I thought, well, I'll just stay for the week. I'll just stay for the week, and then I'll go home. And by the end of the week, you've got into a routine. You've got into a routine with how it works, and I started filling my. I had a water bottle they call an Nalgene bottle, and you can put boiling water in it. So every night I would fill that with boiling water. I would stick that down my sleeping bag, and then I would get in, and I'd have it on my stomach, on my chest. It's that cold. I've got a plastic bottle of boiling water in my chest. It's that cold, and I'm fully dressed. And then I would generally go to sleep like that.
Is this something your body ever gets used to? Because you said you were there for 8 weeks. Does your body eventually get used
Yeah, you do acclimatise to it. But I went 2 years on the trot, and I lost 2 stone both times. So the trouble is your body's working so hard to stay warm. It's everything you put inside it is just dissolving it and using it up and more. So I came back 2 stone lighter both times. So that's a huge loss of weight in. I was actually there both times. I was there the first time for about 5 weeks and the second time for 6 weeks. I didn't do the whole 2 month slot because I didn't need to.
Okay.
And both times I lost 2 stone in that period of time. So yeah, you can't afford to be ill there. If you get ill
Yeah.
at base camp, you might as well go home because you're not going to cope. But you do get used to it. Yeah, it's like any environment. It's like any environment. If you just give it enough time, you will adapt to that environment and you'll get your methods of dealing with it. So every night I'd be the last out of the mess tent. I realized that with 16 of us in the expedition, all of us in the mess tent together, it's actually quite warm, because everyone's breathing, everyone's giving off body warmth.
Mm.
Mess tent is quite warm. When you get down to the last 2 or 3 people about 10 o'clock at night, it gets quite cold. And we had a gas heater in there, but the expedition leader told us to turn it off at 9 o'clock. So once the gas heater went off, it would very quickly get cold. And once people started going to bed, it would get cold. And I would always be the last one. I'd be sitting there reading my book thinking, oh, got to go to that horrible tent and go to sleep now. And that was always a bit I didn't enjoy very much.
Yeah. Right. So obviously you end up on, I think it's the worst day in terms of disasters in Everest history, or at least for decades. How describe that morning before it happened? What happened with that?
Yeah, it was the earthquake and the avalanche at base camp, and it was we had a party the night before. Actually, we had a meeting tent, and we'd invited the people from Adventure Consultants over next door to have a party, and we'd all been dancing. And I can tell you, at 5,400 meters, you want to try drinking a pint of beer than dancing. I can tell you, you're absolutely out of breath. It's like,
Mm.
I would manage about a quarter of the song dancing away. You'd be like. And then you'd be like, oh God, I've got to stop. So, we would only be jigging about a bit for a very short period of time. And then we'd stop and you'd try and have another sip of beer. And, alcohol and altitude don't go together well. But we were bored. We're waiting you're basically waiting for a weather window to have a go at the summit. So when you're at Everest at base camp, you do what they call rotations. So you go up so you've got base camp, camp 1, camp 2, camp 3, camp 4, and then the summit. So there's 4 camps in between and base camp. So what you'll do is you'll wait for a reasonable weather window and you'll go up to camp 1, then come back down again. And then you'll go from camp 1 to camp 2, stay overnight at camp 2, then come back down again. Then you'll try and get to camp 3, and after that, you're waiting for a good weather window to go for the summit. And each time you go higher, your body acclimatizes and produces more red blood cells. The red blood cells carry the oxygen around the body. What you're trying to do is get the body to produce tons of red blood cells.
Mhm.
So you're really well oxygenated. The Olympics, that people go and train at high altitude for the Olympics. Yeah. It's not cheating, but it's what you're trying to do is you're trying to get lots of red blood cells in the system. And when I came back from Everest, I remember going for a run with a friend of mine, and she was an ex-Scottish international runner, and she couldn't keep up with me, doing 5K. And it was like my legs were going like this, and my top of my body was just stationary, and I'm chatting away, and legs are going like that. And I'm just absolutely rattling around this 5K circuit. I was always a reasonable runner, but I'm not a good, not a good runner. My build is too big for it, really. And I remember going around the run, and she was exhausted at the end of it, and I was like, wow, that was great, no problem, because I'd had so much oxygen in the system. And that's what you're trying to do. You do the rotations to build up the red blood cells to help you when you go for the summit. And then, but unfortunately, that year we didn't get the opportunity in 2015. So 2007 was the worst disaster on Everest ever originally, and that was 11 people died, and they made the Everest film about that. I don't know whether you've seen the Everest film.
No, 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 I've not seen those.
It was out a couple of years ago. It was about Rob Hall and Scott Fisher, and they were the sort of two renowned expedition leaders. And Rob Hall was his expedition team was Adventure Consultants, and he died above Camp 4, sitting in the snow, talking to his wife on the satellite phone. It was absolutely horrific. If you watch the film, it's very traumatic. She's begging him to move. He says, I can't move. My legs are frozen. I can't move. And he died up there. So that was very, very traumatic. 11 people died, and that was the worst disaster on Everest to that point. In 2014, that's the year before I went, the Sherpas were going up through the icefall. So to get from base camp to Camp 1, you go through what they call the Khumbu icefall. And it's full of crevasses and seracs, and it cracks and it bangs, and it's very noisy when you're going through it, and bits of it are moving everywhere. And it's where the snow all comes into a very narrow gap as it comes down the mountain, the glacier, and it all pops up and cracks. And this is the bit that the Sherpas have to keep open. So they have to put ladders across the crevasses, and it's very, very difficult to navigate. It's the second hardest part of the route. So base camp to Camp 1 is the Khumbu Icefall. That is the second hardest part. The hardest part, obviously, is Camp 4 to the summit, last bit. And yeah, so we were just getting ready to try that and give that a shot to get up through the Khumbu Icefall.
Can you say from again an interview heard from that you do a while ago? Can you say that your first notice that something was wrong was that everything seemed to shift to the left?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so on that particular day, we'd been partying the night before. I'd got up, had some breakfast, had a bit of a hangover actually. I saw a few beers. I wasn't feeling too good. We had a great night actually. We had a really fun night. We'd met the people from Adventure Consultants. Adventure Consultant. Rob Hall's old team. His wife kept them going. They were next door to us. So the physio had come over. The camp leader had come over. We'd all been dancing. It was great fun. And some of their expedition team had come over. And then the next day, I'd had breakfast, bit of a hangover. I thought I'd go and lie in my tent and just relax. About midday, all of a sudden, the ground just went to the left. They went up. It was like somebody lifting me up. I felt like somebody's pushing my back because I'm lying down. I was like, what the hell? And then shunted to the right. And I was like, what the hell was that? So I got out. I got out of my tent, and I'm just wearing my socks. I'm looking around, and everyone's staring in a certain direction. So I'm looking over in that direction, and I'm looking at what they're looking at. And the whole of Pulmori, opposite Everest, the whole of the mountainside is just coming down towards us. I mean, the most enormous avalanche you have ever seen. And the sky was just full of cloud. It was like everything was just a complete whiteout. It was incredible. It was all coming towards us at a huge speed. And I thought, I'm going to die. This is it. I'm going to die. And it was either run or it was get back in the tent. The last minute, I dived back in the tent, and I got buried alive in the tent.
How long were you buried alive before someone?
Oh, not very long at all, because I could get a. I mean, what happened is the tent was obviously open, and all the snow came down, and it built up around the tent, and it all came in the tent as well. It destroyed in our camp. It destroyed the communications tent completely. Destroyed the gents' toilets. Destroyed the team leader's tent. Luckily, he was away at the time in Kathmandu. Completely destroyed them, and the toilet tent. It picked up the metal rods in the tent, threw them through the air, and we found them stuck through our meeting tent, through the canvas of the meeting tent, like spears. They were just stuck in the side of it. So you can imagine the force with which it ripped that tent up, and through the and through the steel rods through the air. And yeah, I could get myself out of it. I could lift myself up and dig myself out. So I was buried for a matter of minutes. But it was the most terrifying thing was not knowing. You know, if you saw the skies fill full of snow now in front of you, what are you going to do?
You can't do anything. You can't go anywhere.
No, you know, you sort of like, what am I going to do? I'm about to die. What am I going to do? You know, it's like, oh, this isn't good. You know, and I remember thinking afterwards, it seemed like an awfully long time that the snow was coming towards us. It was like slow motion. You know, the brain goes into overdrive, adrenaline just in the brain. It was like, whoa, everything goes in slow motion. And I could see all the snow coming. And it seemed to me like it was quite a long time before I then dived into the tent. And then it was like, everything speeds up again, you know, huge noise as all the ice and rocks and snow flew over us. And but it's very funny. It's slow motion, and I watched somebody was actually had a GoPro going, and I watched the GoPro of it coming in towards our camp, and it was seconds. It was a few seconds before it overwhelmed us, but it felt like a long time.
Yeah, I was going to say, even those seconds, if things like that seems to be like time slows down for everyone or
Yeah,
something.
and it was like sort of you know, everything sort of slows down, and it was like I think the adrenaline in the brain. So it was quite it was quite shocking. And then I got up, and the funny thing is, you know, the first thing I did, I looked for my phone and my laptop, and they were buried in the snow as well. Isn't that weird? You know, the first thing I looked for, you know, I'm sort of like, yeah, I'm okay, right? Oh crikey, everything's covered in snow, and I'm digging down and trying to find my phone and my laptop. I mean, that's just weird, isn't it?
So once you got you're buried alive in snow, you got
Hmm.
out after a few minutes. What was the scene like? Was it like a triage, like A&E? Was it terrible? Like what was it like?
Well, you know, I sort of got out the tent. I remember I just sort of I got all the snow off my bags, and then for the next few minutes, I was sort of shoveling snow out of the tent and getting everything clear, you know. And luckily, the laptop had been buried in it, but only for a brief period. So I was putting everything back in the bag, zipping it all up, getting everything dry, and then I put my shoes on. I got no shoes. I put my shoes on, went outside, and it was sort of like what's just, you know, it wasn't I wasn't thinking what does the scene look like. I was thinking what the hell just happened, what on earth, you know. I thought, is this the end of the world? Is this a nuclear war that's just started? And you know,
Yeah.
what the hell was going on? I had absolutely no idea. None of us knew what was going on. We just knew that this thing had come towards us, you know, this huge cloud of ice and snow, and we didn't know what it was. You know, it could have been an explosion for all I knew. It could have been a nuclear war. It could have been, I don't know, it could have been anything. I wasn't sure what was going on. And of course, what it did is that we had satellite dishes. We had comms by satellite dish. Of course, satellite dishes have been blown halfway down the mountain, so we had
Yeah.
no communication. So we couldn't communicate with the outside world unless we could find a sat phone. And one guy had a sat phone. Of course, everybody wanted to use that sat phone to call the relatives and say we're okay. So I didn't sort of worry about that. I thought, well, I'll just, you know, what are we going to do? And we went into the meeting tent, and we were all having a chat in the meeting tent. And the chef, we had a cook, the chef, Welsh guy, really nice guy in his late 50s, just come out to do the cooking. You know, you need good food. If you're going to climb Everest, you need good food, good breakfast, good lunch, good. You need to keep the weight on. And he'd come just to do that, and he'd been caught out in the snow. I've never seen somebody that suffered from shock so badly before. He was still standing there in his, you know, fully dressed with his glasses. His glasses were all covered in snow. He was covered in snow. He was like this, just standing there. I'm like, "You're all right, mate. You're all right." And he didn't move. He didn't move. He couldn't walk. Couldn't move. Couldn't do anything. He was just. We had to literally pick him up with his arms by his side. We just picked him up like rigid, absolutely rigid. Carried him into the meeting tent, brushed all the snow off him, and sat him down. And he was still just like this. People were talking to me. You're right. You're right. Complete shock, and it had overridden everything, and he just shut down. And it was about half an hour, 40 minutes before he actually came out of it.
It's terrible.
So we were in the meeting tent chatting about it and what the hell's gone on, you know, trying to work it out. And somebody said it's a massive avalanche, and we weren't sure what had triggered the avalanche because we didn't have any communications. And they said we better check around base camp because of course there's 20, 30 odd expeditions there. There's all the other people there. And we said we better check. And I said, well, and we had the meeting tent was fine, and the mess tent was fine, and our kitchen tent was fine because they were all down a bit of a dip, and it's sort of gone over the top of them. We're in a sort of dish in the glacier, luckily in a sort of low spot. And I said, I'll go up on the ridge. There's like a walkway past our camp, which was the way out of base camp down to Grupshep, the first village, which was about a 2-hour trek down the valley. I said, I'll go up on the ridge. And I went with another guy, Woody, and we said, we'll see who needs help, who's coming past, and we'll tell them we've got our meeting tent. It's all good. So if other people's tents have been destroyed and they need somewhere to go, come to our tent. Come in with us, and then we'll see if we can get some hot water boiling, see if we can get some tea and coffee, and we've got lots of biscuits, just make people feel comfortable that they've got somewhere they can be. Yeah.
Mm.
So we went up there, and this girl came up to me. It was one of the girls, it was actually the physio that I'd seen the night before. She came up to me, and she looked just terrible. She looked absolutely white. And I said, what's that on your jacket? And the whole front of her jacket was covered in something. And she said, it's blood. I said, are you all right? And she said, yeah, it's not mine, it's the Sherpa's blood. And then she just fell against me, just sobbing like mad, just sobbing. I'm just holding her, and she's just absolutely sobbing uncontrollably. And what had happened is luckily, this is Adventure Consultants again. This was the 2007 expedition, Rob Hall's team. They kept it going after his death. His wife kept it going, and they were the camp next to us. And the avalanche, they'd taken the full force of the avalanche. It had destroyed everything in their camp. And luckily for them, they'd sent their team up the mountain that morning, 1 o'clock in the morning, 1 a.m. And this was midday. So their team were up at Camp 1. And Camp 1 experienced the avalanches, but it didn't hit the tents. So Camp 1 was far safer than base camp. So thank goodness. Death toll would have been twice as bad if their team had been at their camp at the time. And she'd run with the camp manager to the Westerners' tent. They have a Westerner tent and a Sherpa tent. The Sherpas had gone to the Sherpa tent, which was full of all the cooking equipment. And when the blast had hit it, had blown the cooking equipment over the top of the Sherpas. And they found one of the Sherpas, and he was still alive, and all the back of his head was caved in, and she'd been holding him as he died. This was what the blood was on the jacket. She'd actually been cradling him in her arms when he died. Nobody should have to experience that. And then when they picked him up, they found the other 2 Sherpas buried underneath them, both dead. So that was really, really traumatic. And we took her down into the meeting tent, got her some tea and biscuits and everything, and then Woody and I went back up to the ridge again to try and see if there's anybody else that needed help. And the really sad thing is, she after that, they Adventure Consultants came and stayed in our camp because they had nothing left in their camp. It was completely destroyed, no tents. So we gave them one of the mess tents, and we gave them our meeting tent somewhere for them all to sleep, and found some camp beds and made them all up. Every night between 2 and 3 in the morning, she would wake up screaming, and it would wake us all up. We were in our own little individual tents, and we just heard this loud screaming in the morning between 2 and 3, and it would be her actually screaming and sobbing. And then all the lights would go on the meeting tent, and they would manage to calm her down, and then she would go to sleep again. But I don't think she will ever recover from that experience. Poor girl. She's an American client had employed her to come to base camp to give them physiotherapy every day after climbing. Very rich guy, and she thought she was coming really for a super duper holiday at Everest Base Camp at 5,400 meters, never thinking she would get involved in anything like that. She wasn't even going to climb, So it was quite sad, quite sad.
Yeah, obviously straight away, seems like you suffer from PTSD.
Yeah, I think so. And she wasn't part of our camp, and I wasn't really in touch with her, so I don't know what happened. She was from New Zealand. She went back to New Zealand. So I really hope she was okay, and I hope she's had, some treatment, and she's made a full recovery. I really hope so.
Yeah, let's hope so indeed. Let's pray for
Yeah.
recovery.
And then there's another couple I met up on the 2 couples actually up on top of the ridge. They were wearing shorts and t-shirts. And I said, where are you going? They go, we've got to go. We've got to go. The lady said to me, we've got to go. We've got to go. Come on, we've got to go. I said, where are you going? We just got to go. We've got to go. I said, you're going down to Grupshep. I said, it's a 2-hour trek. It's a 2-hour trek down there. You don't need to go anywhere. She said, after shops, we've got to go. We've got to go. and we didn't know where by that stage we'd sort of found out that it was an earthquake. We didn't know the center of the earthquake, so we didn't know how close we were to the epicenter of the earthquake and what the aftershocks would be like. It turns out the earthquake was actually far closer to Kathmandu. So in going down the valley, actually going towards the epicenter of the earthquake, and we were actually far safer at base camp. And I said, why don't you come into our meeting tent and have some tea and biscuits and, just get yourself together. No, we've got to go. And these two couples just disappeared off into the distance, gone in literally shorts, t-shirts and trainers.
Mm. Yeah, it's a weird thing what shock can do to you.
Yeah, it was fight or flight, isn't it? Fight or flight, and they were flight. They just wanted to get the hell out of there, and they thought by going somewhere they were doing good, but actually they were heading towards the centre of it.
Was there any aftershocks?
There were a couple of aftershocks, yeah, but they were very mild. It would just rumble again. I think we had a couple that day and a very mild one the next day. You could feel it. You could feel everything just shudder. But it was on the Richter scale. It was something like a 7.8 magnitude, I think. So it was a big one. The earthquake itself was a big earthquake, and that shook all the ice off Pomori. I said to people, it's like you imagine, St Albans, the town.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you imagine that size of ice falling off a mountainside. So the whole of St Albans town coming down the mountainside. You imagine how big that is. That's huge, absolutely huge. So that came down the mountainside, created a vacuum. When it hit the bottom, it then exploded across the valley, and we were in the middle of the valley. So we would see the earthquakes every day, small ones coming down, and we'd see all the spray coming up, but they would never get anywhere near base camp because we're in the middle of the valley. But this one was so big, it just blew straight across the valley. One guy got blown 250 meters out of his tent.
Gosh.
He didn't survive.
I can't even imagine, apart from it's going to sound flippant, it's not meant to be, but apart from a very bad night in A&E, I
Yeah.
can't imagine a scene where you see that many people who are desperately in need for treatment. How long was it before any external aid agencies could come and help you and support you?
Well, that was the issue that, Kathmandu, if you look it up, Kathmandu was so badly damaged. Lots of buildings had collapsed, lots of people injured, and they closed the airport. So no one could get in or out. They closed I think the airport was closed for 24 or 48 hours, and then they opened it to allow military assistance and aid to come in. So the Americans brought a load of helicopters in. I think the British sent some, the French sent some, the Indians sent a lot because obviously India and Nepal right next door to each other got a very close relationship, so they sent a lot of aid as well. And they opened the airport to let the aid in, but of course, our link to the outside world was via helicopter. So we'd done the 10-day trek from Lukla up to base camp, and the link with the outside world was either the Sherpas and the yaks coming up every day. There was a continuous stream of yaks and Sherpas bringing up more food, more sleeping bags, tents, whatever, oxygen cylinders, whatever we needed. There was a continuous train of people coming up and down, and the helicopters. The helicopters were vital. There were 6 of them that were coming backwards and forwards. Now, if you're a helicopter pilot and you've seen this and the ground shaking, you're not going to be leaving your helicopter on the ground. You're going to be taking off in the end. You're going to be getting the hell back to Kathmandu, and then probably just sitting tight to see what No one was coming up to base camp. That was for sure. It was pretty much you're on your own. So you imagine in this, in the UK, you get a problem, you ring up, you call the police, you call the ambulance service, and those emergency services will kick in and they will be with you in a relatively short period of time. It may not be as quick as you want, but within 30 minutes or an hour or whatever, there'll be an ambulance there and they'll sort you out. They're experts, they know what they're doing, they're trained in it, they're probably paramedics, and they'll take you to a hospital and they will continue on the treatment then with some fairly sophisticated equipment. We had basically ibuprofen and paracetamol, and that was it. We really, it was pain management. That was it. So I set up I got one of our mess tents and I said, look, let's get this organized. And if anybody's injured and needs help, will use one of our mess tents as like a mini hospital, because
Mm.
I'm a mountain first aider. I do that with my ski guiding. So I said, let's get that set up. And we ended up with 18 people in there, and they brought one Sherpa in. I'll never forget it. It was really, it was so sad. They brought him in. He's like, and within 5 minutes he died. He died right there next to me. And they closed his eyes, and they started doing what they're sort of like a puja. You know, they have to start chanting immediately. And I said, guys, I'm sorry, you can't do that in here. And we've got 17 other people, and you're absolutely freaking them out because somebody's just died. So we cleared the washroom, and they took him into the washroom, and they did their sort of puja. And it was puja. It's something like, it's the ceremony, the Buddhist ceremony that they do. And they did that, and they have to chant immediately the person dies. And they did that there, and I looked after the other people. And there was a guy, we thought he'd broken his neck. There were lots of people with broken. A guy came in with broken ribs, and I said, "Okay, Richard." He goes, "My name isn't Richard. Why do you say Richard?" I said, "Well, it's written on your jacket." He goes, "Oh, this isn't my jacket." He goes, "I was in my underpants and my t-shirt when the avalanche hit, and my tent was blown off me." And he had this guy literally was in his socks and underpants,
Oh my
and it
God.
hit. Tent disappeared. All his belongings disappeared, and he'd literally gone walking around the snow, and he'd found some guy's jacket and put it on, and come down to us. And the jacket was Richard's jacket, and he was John. So it was just bizarre. You know, he had broken ribs. I said, "Well, you're in good shape, mate." I said, "There's nothing." I said, "You're going to be all right." I said, "Trust me, you'll be all right." But a lot of them had lots of facial injuries. You know, really badly banged around the head, and they just wanted to lie very quietly. So we did the best. We got some soup on as well. We got the chef. By this stage, it was it was probably 6 o'clock in the evening. So we'd been working on getting this thing going, and then the chef had recovered, and he'd got himself together, and he'd gone back in the kitchen, and we got some soup and some tea. So we were giving them ibuprofen, paracetamol. We had some bandages, and we were just trying to say to people, have some hot soup, try and get some liquid in you. And a lot of them were bleeding badly. So it was like, let's get some. You need liquid. You need lots of liquid. We got to keep you hydrated because you're losing a lot of blood. And we tried to patch them up as best we could. And then that night, I did a shift, and I said, I'll do till midnight. And another guy was going to do midnight till 3. Sorry, midnight till 2, and then another guy 2 till 4, another guy 4 till 6. And so I had the first shift, and I've got to say, I've never been so tired in my life. I was absolutely shattered at the end of it. And then Rob came in to relieve me at midnight, and I went back to my tent, and I just flaked out. I just gone, absolutely exhausted. And I wake up in the morning, and I felt quite guilty, because the first thing I thought is, oh my gosh, they're going to still be here. They're going to be ill, and some of them will have died, and it'll be really traumatic. And I've got to get back in that tent again. I've got to do this all over again, because I didn't know whether anyone was going to come and help us, you know. And I was thinking, how many people are going to die today on me? And it was really, trying to get up and try and motivate myself, thinking that was what the day held for me. I mean, how doctors do it is beyond me. They are magnificent, and I'm not trained to do this stuff. And I got up and I got out by 7 o'clock and went over to the other mess tent, which we were still using to eat. And I said, "What's happening?" And they said, "Oh, the helicopters came in this morning, and they said they've taken the injured away." So, that everything had calmed down, the helicopters had got in, and I was so relieved. And I felt very guilty, because I was so relieved I didn't have to look after them again for another 24 hours. And I felt quite guilty about that, actually. But the priority was the injured. So, two of the guys that were in our group went out to look for people, dead bodies, and they found most of the dead bodies, and they wrapped them in canvas, tent canvas, and then pulled them to the helipad. And there were a whole series of dead bodies stacked up, wrapped in canvas at the helipad. And of course, they didn't take them, because they didn't. The people that needed assistance were the injured. The dead were dead, so they left their bodies there for several days, and that was quite traumatic.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can't, unless you've been in a, and I'm meaning this in all sincerity, unless you've been in a war,
Hmm.
where something like where you see that much devastation in the
Mm.
end of a war. I can't imagine anything else where you'd be in that environment. And even with war, okay, as a soldier, you're not necessarily prepared to see what you see, but at least you have an idea that that's what could happen. Whereas,
Yeah, well, to me, it was what I imagined a First World War field hospital would be like.
mm,
No real sophisticated medical treatment, just really pain relief, and not knowing how long it was going to be before any help was going to come. That was quite traumatic, actually. That was like, wow. And what people forget is there were about 200 people at 200 people at base camp. I would say probably 40 of those had gone because they left in the first week. So there's probably 160 left. 20 were dead, and over 100 were injured. So that's not many people that were not injured in some
mm.
shape or form. That is pretty horrific. And that's what it's not just about, the 20 dead and 19, 20 dead and over 100 injured. Some minor injuries, some very bad injuries. And we weren't equipped to deal with that, we just weren't equipped to deal with it. And it's you forget in the first world countries how lucky we are to be able to pick up a phone and call emergency services and they come. They come. We take it for granted. Oh yeah, don't worry, we'll call an ambulance and they'll be here in a few minutes and they'll take you away and deal with you. No one was coming.
Right. How long after it happened were you able to call your family and let them know you were okay?
Well, I called them at about 7 o'clock that night. So about 7 o'clock, I'd been in the mess. I'd been in a sort of hospital tent, temporary hospital tent, all afternoon. And I said to somebody, I've got to get something to eat. I said, I've really got to get something to eat and get something to drink because we'd been going non-stop, dealing with people as they'd come in. And I went off to the Sherpa tent because the Sherpas still got some food on the go. And when I was there, I borrowed a satellite phone to phone my dad. And I just said, I'm all right, and he said, oh, thank goodness. It'd been on the news, it'd been on the news. I got quite a few missed calls from people saying, are you all right? Are you still alive? Because it had been on the news back in England and they didn't know. So I rang him and told him to tell everybody else. So he got the message, got the word out.
Gosh.
I mean, 7 hours later, there's been a devastating earthquake and avalanche, and Everest Base Camp has been destroyed. Imagine that. You're thinking,
Yeah.
if my son's there, not too good.
Similar to when when you were very ill, I think only a couple of years before, you must have looked at that and think not just how lucky you were, but I don't know if a new lease of life is the right terminology, but certainly it gave you more of appreciation of life.
I
I
think
guess
I've got a guardian angel, on my
Mhm.
shoulder here. There's somebody's got a greater plan. And what I think is somebody must have a greater plan for me. I've no idea what the greater plan is. I don't know. But I sort of feel somebody must have a greater plan for me.
Mm.
And I don't know what it is. I don't know. It's just, I feel that there must be something there. Otherwise, how could have I escaped death so many times?
Mm. Why did you decide to write a book about it?
I used to work with a guy, Gary Welsh. This guy, he was the COO of Barclays Private Bank. I did some work with him, and a great character, great character. And he wrote a book. It was a novel, and it was quite an amusing novel. And he said to me, he said, Jules, there's a book in everyone. There's a book in everyone. There's one book, and there's at least one book in everybody. And I thought, wow, here I am now. I've been through this incredible experience, truly incredible experience, and I've survived it. And this was 2015 was the worst disaster ever on Everest. That now is the worst disaster. So 2007, we've got 11 people died. 2014, 14 Sherpas died, and then we've got 20 dead in 2015. And I felt very blessed to have been there and survived. I felt wow, and I just thought if I'm ever going to write a book, this has got to be it. This has got to be the moment. This is
Mm.
the opportunity to write something because it's going to be an interesting story. So yeah, so I wrote, this is it. This is the book here, Aftershock.
Yeah.
So I wrote that, and that is really warts and all story about the experience and about going back a year later and try again. And I gave some talks about it as well. And I remember somebody. I mean, I'm not spoiling the story, but I went back in 2016 and successfully summited in 2016, and nearly died on the summit actually. But that's another story. Ran out of oxygen on the summit. I mean, it's just incredibly dangerous,
Just
Everest.
quickly before you continue, did you think at this point, it's going to sound flippant again, but it's not meant to be. We talked about 9 lives. Did you
Yeah.
think you must have more than 9 lives? You must bless. I know you talk about God nature because what you've been through, even before the cancer with your injuries and whatnot, I'm just thinking, My gosh, no one can have that amount of luck. It must be something spiritual in the air about it. And I mean that in all seriousness because I've never known anyone to survive that much.
Well, I think so, because there must be something. That's why I think there's some reason. I don't know what it is, but I summited, and I was in our team. There were 4 of us going for summit with our Sherpas. One guy didn't leave camp 4, so 3 of us went for the summit with 2 Sherpas, and I was the first one out of our team to get to the summit, and I sat there for nearly half an hour, waiting for the other guys to catch up, and then hi, congratulations, marvelous, look at the view, we're just sitting there chatting away, sort of with the oxygen mask, yeah, great view, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, really pleased we made it. Yeah, and it's exhausting up there, and I ran out of oxygen. I used all my oxygen. It started to feel cold. And I said to the guys, "I'm feeling cold. I'm going to move, going to get off the summit." And I started going down, and I was about 150 meters off the summit, and I saw this little sort of hole in the snow, and I thought, "I'll just get in there, just get warm, and I sat down, and it's absolutely fatal. You should never sit down, never sit down, when you're on the last stages of Everest. And I did that, and everything just started to close down. And I heard the other guys go past me, Jules, hi, Taha and Yella. I heard them go past me and sort of shout at me. I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah. And I was just basically closing down. Everything was just shutting down. And then we only had one Sherpa, one Sherpa with 3 of us. It's really bad. And this guy had never summited before. It's a long story, but my Sherpa had switched his oxygen mask with Taha because Taha's oxygen mask had frozen. My Sherpa summited 5 times before, so he said, "Here, take my oxygen mask. I'll use yours. It's defective, but I'll use it. I'll wait down here." So he was a good hour down the mountain, and he'd stayed down there. So we had 3 of us with one Sherpa, which is crazy. Anyway, the guy saved my life. The Sherpa saved my life. He came up to me and he said, "Jules, what are you doing?" I'm like, oh, I'm nodding off, And I could feel him going in my rucksack, and I knew he was looking at my oxygen cylinder. And he goes, "No oxygen, no oxygen." And then he gave me his face mask. I put it on, and it was like, oh, and oh, oh, oh. It was like somebody's just switched the lights on, everything comes back on again. It was like, oh my gosh, I'm like, what's going on? And the little sort of hole that I was seeing in the distance, the little light hole was like, everything just opens back up again. And he says, "You're out of oxygen." I'm like, whoa, whoa. So he took his oxygen cylinder out of his bag and put it in my bag and reconnected me up and made sure my oxygen cylinder was on. I'm like, great, great, great. And of course, he had no oxygen, but we'd stashed bottles down the mountain. So he just disappeared off. So I'm still sitting in my cubbyhole. I mean, he was exhausted. He got no energy either. And he had to get down far enough to get another oxygen bottle. So it was really touch and go. And so I sort of sat there, and I'm still sitting there, and I'm the last person on Everest that day. Everyone's gone. So it's just me, 150 meters off the summit. And I thought, I need to get up. I really need to get up now, move. I really, really, this could have been Rob Hall all over again, sitting there dying. And I thought, I really need to get going. So, sorry, just a bit. So I got up and I started walking down, and I just thought, I've got to keep walking till I get to Camp 4. And about an hour and a half later, I passed my 2 Sherpas. I'm like, "Yeah, hi guys, hi, it's me, going, moving." Didn't stop, just kept going till I got down to Camp 4. And I got to Camp 4, went straight in my tent and just collapsed on the ground in my tent, got in my sleeping bag. And my Sherpa then caught up with me, And he's like, Jules, we got to go. We got to go, mate. We got to get off the mountain. I'm like, no, no. I said, no, I'm having 2 hours sleep. He goes, the weather's closing in. We had a 3-day weather window to get on the summit and get off again. He said, the weather's closing in. We've got to go. I said, no, I'm having 2 hours sleep. I said, do not disturb me. I need 2 hours sleep. So I was fast asleep for 2 hours, and he woke me up with a big bowl of coffee that he brewed up while he was waiting for me, and we had the coffee, and then we carried on climbing down. And we got to Camp 3. I thought, great, we're going to stop now. He's like, no, Jules, we're going to Camp 2, because at Camp 2 there's a cook at Camp 2. There's a mess tent, and it's quite civilized. So Camp 1, you sort yourself out. You know, you've got your little stove, you cook for yourself. Camp 2, they've got a cook there that'll cook for you. The Sherpas love Camp 2. Camp 3, you're cooking for yourself. Camp 4, you're cooking for yourself in the summit. So he wanted to go to Camp 2, and I'm like, there's nothing left in the tank. I'm so tired. I'm so tired. I'm so dehydrated. It's like somebody saying to you, you just finished the marathon, and somebody says to you, don't worry, just one more marathon to go. You're like, oh no, please, you know. No. And it was like that. And anyway, and when you come down what they call the Lhotse face, that's from Camp 3 to Camp 2, it's really steep. And at the bottom of that, you've got Abseil Dam. And I thought to myself, I'm going down and I'm clipped in. I'm clipped in my Jules Mountain. I'm lowering myself down. I've already lost a glove. I've got 3 gloves on. I've lost one of my gloves. I'm lowering myself down. And I'm sort of thinking, I'm going to get to this point where it's a vertical drop. And I thought, I really don't know whether I'm going to actually be able to do the vertical drop or whether I'm going to just fall off the edge. You know, really don't know, because I'm so dehydrated. I'm so exhausted. And somehow the Sherpa caught up with me by the time I got to the vertical drop, and I'd already sort of clipped in ready for it, and I managed to get myself down the vertical drop to the bottom, and then from there it was a relatively flat walk. It was about 2 kilometers to Camp 2, and he radioed up, and the cook came out with some water for us, and I was so dehydrated at that point. I was just like, you know, just trying to get the water. Everything was so dry, you know, it was fizzing on the back of my throat. And we got into Camp 2, and when we got into Camp 2, they cook you. They've got beef there. Beef's a real prized. We were talking about, of course, you don't eat beef anymore. Beef's a really prized thing, you know. And they cooked me this beef with rice and sort of and peas, and it was like a luxury. This was like a really luxury meal for them, special meal, because we'd summited. You know, the 3 of us had summited. Now, yeah, the guys have done it. You know, great. Let's, you know, this is it. So we're at Camp 2, and they cooked me. So he cooked me soup first, and I remember I sat there. I'm like this. I'm like, and it's all dribbling out of my mouth, back in the bowl, and I'm trying to get this soup in. And I know, because when you're at altitude for a long time, you lose your appetite. You totally lose your appetite. And I'm trying to get this soup, and I'm thinking I've got to eat the soup. And whatever else they give me, I know I've got to eat it, because I know I've just lost a huge amount of weight. I've burnt a vast amount of calories. The most important thing is to replace it. And I had no appetite at all. So I'm trying to get this soup. I finished the soup, this huge bowl of rice. Beef comes, I'm like, God. I'm sort of sitting there like this. I'm like, ugh, ugh. You know, no energy at all. And this was about 9:30 at night. So I summited at 9:30 in the morning. So I've been on the go coming down for 12 hours solid, having left the tent at 1 o'clock in the morning to climb up from Camp 4. So I'd spent 9.5 hours climbing up, and I've now just spent 12 hours climbing back down again. And I'm just completely shattered. And I know I've got to eat this beef and rice. So I finish that off. Then he brings me apple pie and custard. I'm not kidding you, apple pie and custard. I'm like, you can't be kidding. I'm like, you know, and I'm like, this was like somebody force feeding you. You know, it was real, and I thought, I've got to eat it. I've got to eat it. So I just sat there. And I have no idea. It must have taken me probably. I'm just sat there by myself in the mess tent. And I'm drinking loads of water, loads and loads of hot water, and it probably took me an hour and a half to eat that meal, with no conversation, nothing going on, just me just sitting there trying to shovel it in, you know. And after that, I came out of the mess tent, and I had to go up. It was literally 20 feet. I had to climb 20 feet up to get to the tents, the sleeping tents, you know. I crawled up on my hands and knees. I couldn't get up. I couldn't stand up. And I got to the first tent, and I thought, I need somebody's. I got my sleeping bag with me, but I hadn't got the energy to blow up my thermal rest, you know, the mat you lie on. So I thought, if I'm lucky, somebody's left theirs inflated in here, one of these tents. Try the first tent, no luck. Crawled to the second one, opened it, and there was a thermarest already inflated in there that somebody had left there. So I crawled in, and I thought, I've got to get my boots off, and I've got to get in the sleeping bag, and I must zip it up, because if I don't, I will die overnight. I'll die of exposure. And I thought, that's all I've got to do. Just Jules, focus and concentrate. And there's nothing left in the tank. And I don't know how I did it. I just dumped my bag, pulled the sleeping bag out, crawled into it, and zipped it up. And then that was it. I was out of the count, and I knew nothing till 10 o'clock the next morning.
God.
I was absolutely out, gone, absolutely. And amazingly, the next morning, I thought I would feel half dead. I thought I would feel really terrible. And actually, I woke up, and of course, you're moving very slow on Everest. It's not like a marathon run.
Mm.
It's 6 breaths and 1 step. That's how fast I was moving. It's like step, step, and that's how fast I was climbing. Really slow. That's how fast you move, and that's on oxygen. Like on the oxygen cylinder. I'm on bucket loads of oxygen, and that's how difficult it is to move on Everest. So I moved very slowly. So my muscles weren't screaming agony from that. I'd been moving very slowly. So I was amazed that, because I'd eaten all the food the night before, all these calories and everything, they'd all come in and processed, and it had all gone. I'd got all the water in it. It had gone very well. So I'd got a lot of calories in, and then of course the next day we had to get back down to base camp. So that was a challenge for the day. So I came down, and Taha and Yella had got down quicker than me the day before. So they'd gone to sleep early, they got up earlier, and they were about to head off to go down. So we all had a chat, and we were all congratulating each other. It was really nice. The Sherpas were there as well. I went in the mess tent, I had a chat with them. They were just packing up their gear, ready to go. And I said, look, I'll be half an hour to an hour, guys. I'll hopefully catch you up on the way down. And so then sat down and had a good breakfast, and then headed off with my Sherpa about an hour later. And we bumped into an English doctor on the way up, and he was in real trouble. He was quite ill, actually, and took his vital signs. He was suffering from from altitude sickness, and he got swelling in the brain, and he really wasn't very well. And I ended up radioing down to say, he's like, no, I'm all right, I'm all right. I'm like, oh, and I'm checking his vitals. His vitals are bad. He's got a really bad headache. And I said, you need to get down. The only real cure for altitude sickness is to go down. So get in a helicopter and fly down the valley. And as soon as you fly to a lower altitude, you'll feel better instantly. But if you stay at altitude, the chances are you'll get bleeding in the brain and you'll die. So I called a helicopter and got him in the helicopter. So we were there for so what you don't want to be. This is the Khumbu Icefall. Bear in mind now we're going down from Camp 1 back down to base camp. This is the crevasses and the seracs and everything. You don't want to be in the icefall when the sun comes up. So you don't want to be in the icefall past 10 o'clock. So this is why most expeditions, they'll leave at 1 o'clock in the morning, get through the icefall before the sun comes out, before it starts to warm up and it all starts cracking. So of course we'd left at 10. We were in the icefall. We've seen this guy. He's ill. We stayed with him for an hour, and my Sherpa's saying, we must go, because it's all starting to melt, And I'm saying, no, this is a fellow Englishman. I'm going to stay with him until the helicopter comes. We're going to make sure he's all right. Then we'll go down. By the time we went down, there was water running through the icefall, and it was cracking like mad. And the anchors, the ice anchors, were coming loose, and you've got to belay yourself down various parts of it. So we went down pretty fast, actually. We were almost running in places. You're sort of in the crevasse, and it's all cracking around, and you're thinking, this isn't great. I don't want to be here, because if it all moves, it'll crush us to death. And we moved very quickly through the icefall and got down the rest of the way and radioed up to the camp leader. And the camp leader, great chap, he came up with 2 beers for us, got 2 cans of beer, came up and met us as we came out of the icefall. He's like, there you go, guys. I'm like, whoa, fantastic, absolutely fantastic. And there were 16 people in our expedition. And because there was only a 3-day clear weather window, 4 of us were chosen. This was the first attempt of the season on Everest. and the four of us were chosen in the first group. For whatever reason, I don't know, but the four of us were chosen. And I felt quite guilty about that because, you know, we've left behind the other 12 that are also desperate to give it a go and get up there. And we've been chosen, three of us summited. We came back to base camp and everyone was there. Everyone was so nice. They were all like, "Congratulations, Jules, well done." You know, the girls were all giving me a hug. Guys were shaking my hand. "What was it like up there?" You know, I felt so guilty. I felt so guilty that I'd been in this group and they'd still got to do it. You know, I thought, how would I feel if the roles reversed? And I would have been champing at the bit to get up there, you know, and I felt so bad. And that night over dinner, they made us a cake, celebration cake. I was like, oh my gosh, you know, oh. And I thought, this is everyone's dream here. And I've got up, and these 12 other people are still waiting for their chance to go. But they were so nice. They were so nice and so kind about it, and you know, really good spirited about it. You know, it's a big team effort. Sherpas were great. And I said to the camp leader, I said, I want to go home now and see my daughters. Because you can stay, you know, you can stay for the next 2 weeks and the rest of the team were going to have their crack at going up and summiting. And they did actually find another weather window later on, and another 5 of them made the summit out of our team. So half our team made the summit. So that was pretty good. And they had a week's clear weather window for that. But I said, I need to go home now. You know, I just didn't want to. I don't know what it was really. It's like I've done it now. I just want to see my kids. You know, a long time to be away from your kids, 8 weeks. I just wanted to come home and see them. So I said to the expedition leader, I said, can I get out tomorrow? Is there a helicopter going that can fly me back down to Lukla? And he said, yeah, we can arrange that. So I jumped on a helicopter the next day. I was on a helicopter with a guy that had no legs. I was like, whoa, that is so cool. Japanese guy, very famous climber, lost both his legs in a climbing accident, below the knee. And he's now got 2 titanium pins and titanium feet. And he wears climbing boots and he has special sticks. And he was trying to summit Everest. He tried a couple of times before. They had the whole television crew there with him, everything. You know, there's a whole big crew. And they were filming his attempt. And he'd got up to Camp 4 and then he hadn't made it to the summit, and then he had to call it a day. But incredible guy, you know. And that's the thing, you know. I'm thinking, well, you know, I've got all my limbs and legs, and I've just managed to get there. This guy, incredible. You know, he's got up to Camp 4. He's almost made the summit with no legs. You know, no legs. I mean, wow. And I was so humbled by this guy. He was just incredible, and he was so well known too. I couldn't believe everywhere we went, because I was in the helicopter with him. We got down to Lukla, and we had to wait Lukla. For another helicopter to take us back to Kathmandu. And we sat in the cafe, and there was still and there was a lot of toing and froing, and you know, you had to wait your turn to go on the helicopter. And several times we thought we got a helicopter, then we hadn't. We were in the cafe for a couple of hours, and everybody knew this guy. Everyone wanted to take a picture with him. Everyone wanted to shake his hand. I'm like, wow, this guy's so awesome. He was just great. So, and then I got it, and then the cloud was coming in. I think I got one of the last helicopters out that night. Cloud was coming in, and got this crazy guy with the red helmet. And everyone says, don't go with the guy with the red helmet. I got in the helicopter, and the pilot's there with the red helmet. I'm like, oh, jeepers, it's the guy with the red helmet. And we took off. And because the cloud had come in low, he just skimmed over the hill, shot down the other side, and we just weaved around. It felt like we were feet off the ground. We were probably 100 feet, 200 feet, and we were just skimming the valley. It was bloody terrifying, I can tell you, absolutely terrifying. We got back to Kathmandu that night, and it was amazing. It was just incredible, and I got a flight out the next day to get back to the UK.
Wow. I mean, that's just an incredible story.
Mm.
With that, are there any adventures, not necessarily mountaineering again, but are there any adventures that you would like to try or have tried since then?
Yeah, well, there's another one I've done actually. I've just written another book actually, and I flew. Somebody was buying a helicopter, a Bell helicopter, Bell 505, and they make them in Canada, near Montreal, a place called Mirabel, not to be confused with Mirabel in France. And they said, "Oh, we got to bring it back, and they've got to dismantle it, put it in a container, you know." So I've got to pay for dismantling, got to pay for the containerization, got to pay for shipping, got to get insurance for the shipping. And then when it gets over to the UK, I've got to pay to have it reassembled again. I'm like, man alive. And this costs lots, you know. And I said, isn't it cheaper to fly it back? Yeah, he said, but no one's ever flown a Bell 505 transatlantic. You're talking about, you know, you're talking about a small helicopter that's got a flying capacity of about 300 miles. Well, transatlantic is 4,000 miles, 3,800. Yeah. So how are you going to fly a helicopter that can do about 350 miles, 350 miles? How are you going to fly it 3,000 miles transatlantic? And I thought, I know this is possible. I thought this is a great challenge, so I thought I'll do this. This sounds great. And I don't even qualify. I qualified as a pilot after coming back from Everest because I was so impressed as a helicopter pilot because I was so impressed by helicopter pilots. Well, this is great. So I learned to fly. So I'd only been flying for 3 years. I thought this can be done. So I checked it out. Other people have flown helicopters, bigger ones, transatlantic. And what you do is you go from Canada, you go up north, somewhere like Panneatong, you then fly over to Greenland, to the west coast of Greenland, Nuuk and Sisimiut, and you fly over the polar ice cap to Amasilac or Kulusuk on the east coast of Greenland, and you can fly from there over to Iceland. You can then fly over the top of Iceland. You then fly from Iceland to the Faroe Isles, from the Faroe Isles to Scotland. So it's possible with an extra tank. So I said, right, I'll do that. I'll bring it back for you. That's what I did. And I've just written another book, which hasn't come out yet, but that's called Arctic Insanity, as in the Arctic. And it was insane. It was far more dangerous than. See, people don't really get it with that. They say, well, transatlantic, you know, I've flown on a 747 or an A380, whatever. I've flown transatlantic. What's the big deal? But, you know, you've got a really super duper plane there with backup electronics, with a pressurization system, with oxygen, you know, with all these safety devices, and it's built for it. Trust me, a little helicopter is not built to fly transatlantic. There was no oxygen, there was no pressurization, there was barely any heating in it. You know, it is literally a glass bubble with a jet engine strapped over your head, and that's it. And you have to be incredibly careful of the fog and the ice. So that's what I did, and I did it a couple of years ago, and the book's out in July. So anyway, if you like this book, if you like that, look up Aftershock Everest on Amazon. If you like that book, then Arctic Insanity will be coming out later this year in July time, I think.
If anyone wants to find out any more information about you, not just that book, but just about you in general, where can they go to?
You can go to my website at julesmountain.co.uk.
Okay, cool. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I'll leave a description. I'll leave the your website in the description of this video below. It's been incredible talking to you. That's a courageous, memorable story. I've interviewed people on here who've done adventures, but not quite like that. So thank you again so much for coming onto the podcast. It really is much appreciated.
Chris, you're very kind. You're too kind. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope it's of interest to your listeners. And and one other note, if I can say, all proceeds from the books go to the cancer charity that work at UCLH. So I get nothing from the book. Proceeds go to the cancer charity. So if you like my story and you want to help, please buy a copy of the book, and the money will go to the cancer charity. But thank you, Chris. Really enjoyed this. You've been a great host, and thank you for inviting me on.
Cool. Thank you very much.